Alright, welcome back. Sebastian here. So time for my preview for the 2025 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. This is the finale of what's been a pretty excellent 2025 F1 season. So starting out right away, we're going to take a look at the circuit layout, of course, around the Yas Marina circuit. Big redesign in 2021, so this is the 5th year with the revised layout. Now, Sector 1 of this layout is basically just turn 1, and then the sweeping turns 2, 3, 4. No real overtaking zones here. The start-finish straights generally too short, although sometimes you can have a bit of chaos at the first corner, as it's a relatively short run, and the cars are still pretty closely packed together. Now, Sector 2 is really the most interesting in terms of overtaking opportunities. Sometimes you can get runs down into Turn 5, as we saw in the 2021 title decider, with Verstappen overtaking Hamilton on the last lap. But realistically, the two better opportunities are the long straight from Turns 5, Turn 6, DRS there. But then sometimes if you get overtaken into that first Turn 6, 7 chicane, you can repass on the second long straight with DRS going into the quasi hairpin of Turn 9. Then you get to Sector 3, which is really the part of the lap that really creates really large separation between the cars. A lot of really slow speed corners, 12, 13, 14, 16, etc. And that's one of the reasons why historically the racing has not been that great around the track. But I do think it has been better since 2021 with that new layout. Now, some stats about this circuit. It's 5.281 kilometers in length, and we're expected to have 58 laps of racing on Sunday. The race lap record, a bit of a surprise here. It's held by Kevin Magnussen, set last year with a 1:25.637, with an average speed of that lap being 222 kilometers an hour, which ranks 11th of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar, so right in the middle in terms of average speed. Now for downforce rating, it's 0.63, so in the high end of the middle range, but you generally tend to see more medium downforce here, just because those two straights are so long that running a high downforce wing would make you so slow during those two straights, and therefore make it that it would be very easy for you to be overtaken by other cars. Cars are at full throttle for 55% of the lap, and the corner tendency tends to be medium or neutral, so you do have a mix of slow speed corners, high speed, and medium speed corners as well. But generally, I would say in terms of actual braking zones, not just corners, generally does lead itself towards the more slow speed stuff. Now, pole to win ratio here is very high, 73%, which really highlights how important qualifying is. The pole sitter has won this race every year since 2015, which I think just kind of highlights that fact even more. Now, in terms of rookie qualifying percentage, it's 55%, which ranks first of the 24 tracks on this year's calendar. So it's a track that's generally very favorable to rookies. Part of that is because it's usually it's been one of the last races of the season for its entire time on the F1 calendar, but also the fact that this is where the postseason test is. So new rookies coming in, often they will get their first chance in an F1 car at this track. It's also on the F Formula 2 GP2 calendar, so again, it's a track that most drivers know pretty well. Now, in terms of safety car percentage, relatively low, only 25% here, a lot of runoff, and like I said, there haven't been a lot of incidents here over the years, partially because I think especially prior to 2021, cars were generally separated quite a bit by that Sector 3, which meant a lot less of them were having run-ins with each other on track. And of course, it's not a new track anymore, but I would say it's still one of the newer tracks on the F1 calendar, with its first race being in 2009. Now, tires for this weekend are the soft C5, medium C4, and the hard C3. Which are, again, not the softest tire in the range. Of course, the C6 tire has been a bit useless this year, but again, is much softer range of tires than what we saw last time in Qatar. Now, for weekend schedule, of course, no sprint race this weekend, so just a bog standard schedule in terms of having 3 practice sessions. Now, for Friday, FP1 will be at 1:30 in the afternoon, FP2 at 5 p.m., with the expected temperature for FP2 being 26 degrees and sunny/clear, as of course for the FP2 qualifying in the race. it will basically start at sunset, and then by the end of the session, it will be full on night. So that's why the weather's a little bit dicey there in terms of it's not exactly clear, but it's not sunny either. Now for Saturday, FP2 is at 2:30 in the afternoon, followed by qualifying at 6, with the expected weather for qualifying being 25 degrees and clear. Then we get to Sunday, Grand Prix at 5 p.m. sharp, with the expected weather for the start of the Grand Prix 26 degrees and clear. Doesn't look like there's any threat of rain this weekend. Track conditions look relatively stable across the 3 days. So again, for the engineers and for the teams, it shouldn't be too difficult to figure out how to best set up the cars for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Now, in terms of last year's race, this was a race won by Lando Norris with a 2-3 for Ferrari, signs ahead of Leclerc. Now, of course, one of the big notable moments from this race was the fact that Esteban Ocon was basically forced to basically not drive for the final race of the season because Flavio Briatore wanted to send a message. And effectively, he forced Ocon to basically drop out for the final race in order to do the postseason test with Haas. That, of course, allowed Jack Doohan to make his F1 debut early in what would turn out to be a very short career for the Australian. Now, for the start of the race, of course, there was contact between Piastri and Verstappen. Verstappen just kind of miscalculating the turn into turn 1, and that sent the two of them spinning around and basically let Norris basically just drive off into the distance. Of course, this was also important with the context of the fact that McLaren and Ferrari were competing for the Constructors' Championship. But Mercedes did have a pretty sizable lead going into the race, so it basically would have required like a borderline Ferrari 1-2, and Norris winning that race made it very, very difficult for Ferrari to have won the Constructors anyway. Further back, a little bit later on in lap 1, Bottas and Perez made contact there, and that sent Perez into a spin in what would be and he would end up retiring from what would be his final race with Red Bull. Bottas will get involved in action a little bit later, but we'll get to that in a second. Piastri trying to make a comeback through the field, not have the cleanest of times, actually made contact with Colapinto going down the back straight, but luckily not much damage there. And then a little bit later on in the race, Bottas with probably even a more egregious mistake, just completely locked up and wiped Magnussen out of the Grand Prix and received a penalty for that. But it was Lando Norris winning the Grand Prix, winning his 4th of the season, and ending the season on a high. Now, in terms of title permutations for this weekend, kind of ironic that the 3 drivers, the race winner and then the 2 drivers, Piastri and Verstappen, who got caught up in that lap 1 melee, all of them have basically been the title contenders for this 2025 season, and as a result, all of them in fact come into this race mathematically within title contention. Now, Lando Norris is still the heavy favorite, 408 points, 12 points ahead of Verstappen, and then 16 points ahead of Piastri. Now, in terms of deciding if who's the champion, if any of the drivers are level on points. Well, in terms of wins, all of them are tied on 7, and I think based on how the math goes, even if Verstappen wins, there's no way for him to actually end up tied with Norris, just because of how the point separation is. So if Verstappen wins, of course, would put him on 8 points, but he either wins the title or he doesn't, simply because there's no way that if he wins, there's no way for Norris to actually end up with the same points total as him. But where things could get a little bit interesting is, of course, on the countback for P2. So if hypothetically Lando doesn't finish the race, Verstappen finishes 4th, we'll just assume Piastri finishes behind. Of course, Lando's sitting on 8 P2s, Verstappen on 5, and Oscar on 4. And of course, there's no way for any of those drivers to get 8 there. So of course, Lando does generally hold the edge if any 2 drivers tie for the championship lead. Now, in terms of other permutations, so Norris will be champion if he finishes on the podium. That's pretty simple. Verstappen, the easiest way for him to be champion would be to win the Grand Prix, and Norris has to finish 4th or lower. And for any scenario whatsoever, Verstappen has to be third or better. So he must finish on the podium to have any hope of winning the title, regardless of what the other drivers do. Now, for Piastri, this is a little bit more tricky. The easiest way for him to win the title would be to finish first and Norris to finish 6th or lower. The other option would be that he must, and for any situation for him to win the title, he must be second or better. For example, if he is, I believe if he's third, Verstappen's fourth, then, actually no, that's not a good example. If, for example, Verstappen is second, Piastri's second, Verstappen's third, and Norris doesn't finish the race, then that might be a little bit tricky, and that would actually be a situation where I believe Verstappen would actually win the title. So it's not all situations where we must be first or second, but again, without going into every single specific example of who would be champion in which situation, these are kind of the simplest ones that would work for each of them. Now, I was just curious. I wanted to, I'm not a gambling person, but I wanted to just look at some of these odds and see, what the odds are for each driver are for winning the championship. And so I went on the Polymarket, and according to Polymarket, just ignore the number amounts on the other side, on the left side there. But for Norris, according to them, 73% chance of winning. For Verstappen, 23%, and for Piastri, 6%. Now, I think I saw someone online did basically a simulation like I did in one of my videos like a month or so ago. I think in that simulation, Verstappen had basically a 10% chance of winning. So I think the numbers here are they're not, of course, perfectly matching with what the math actually says. But for Norris, I would expect probably like an 80% chance. Verstappen has about 10%, and maybe for Piastri, he probably has about 5% or less. I know that doesn't add up to 100, but still, I think some of the numbers are, not exactly accurate, but nonetheless, interesting to look at. And again, it definitely, backs up the message that, Norris is definitely the heavy favorite going into this race. Now, finishing up this video with looking at best qualifiers, worst qualifiers, and then, of course, predictions for the race. So, best qualifiers here, and I think this is something that could potentially be a wild card, is the fact that this is one of Yuki Tsunoda's best tracks. He's plus 50% compared to his career average here, with a median qualifying gap of negative 0.637 seconds. He's never been out-qualified by a teammate here. That streak's probably going to come to an end, and was looking like it could be his last ever F1 Grand Prix. And of course, he'll want to go out with a bang. What better way to do that would be potentially, being on the podium, helping your teammate win the title. Again, that would be a pretty nice redemption arc for Tsunoda for the end of his season. But based on what we've seen for the first 23 races, I don't think that's particularly likely. Now, number 2 is Lando Norris, your title favorite, plus 12% here, with a median qualifying gap of negative 0.243 seconds. And then number 3 is Charles Leclerc, plus 6%, median qualifying gap of negative 0.15 seconds. Now, in terms of worst qualifiers, actually, Max Verstappen is your worst qualifier, or compared to his career average at this track, minus 19%, but on average, he does still out-qualify his teammates here. Negative 0.273 seconds is his median gap. Now, for second and third, it's actually the two Williams drivers of Albon and Sainz. One of them will have to out-qualify the other here, despite the fact neither of them have great records here relative to their teammates. So for Albon, it's negative 17% median qualifying gap of plus 0.149 seconds, and for Sainz, minus 16%, positive 0.215 seconds. Now, qualifying model predictions for this weekend. The 10 drivers predicted to out-qualify their teammates in the final race of the season are Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Alonso, Gasly, Behrman, Hadjar, Sainz, and Bortoleto. Biggest gap is predicted to be Verstappen. Tsunoda, not a big surprise there, where smallest gap is predicted to actually be Bortoleto and Hülkenberg. So it'll be interesting to see how those all play out. Now, finishing up with predictions. So I think, one of the things I talked about is that, before, was that this is a track that Norris has only done pretty well in qualifying. There's going to be a lot of pressure this weekend, I think, with the title and everything. In terms of the track characteristics and whether that, favors for, Red Bull, or does it favor McLaren. When you look at, for example, the downforce rating, at this level of downforce rating and higher, generally McLaren's been much better than Red Bull. The closest track where Red Bull's gotten pole was actually in Miami, and that was a downforce rating of 0.55. All the other tracks in this kind of range, generally, it's been McLaren have been much better, and Verstappen and Red Bull have been much better on the lower downforce tracks. We kind of saw that play out over one lap last time in Qatar, where even though Verstappen won the Grand Prix, he was kind of handed that win because of McLaren's ineptitude. And the two McLarens took pole by about 0.2 of a second. I think there's just probably too many slow speed corners here, and you can't really run like a Monza type setup here, otherwise you'll just get killed. In sector 3, I think you do need a bit of aero efficiency. So for that reason, I do think McLaren are probably going to be stronger here than Red Bull. Now, for McLaren drivers, I think even though Norris had a very rough time last time in Qatar, he was definitely the weaker of the two McLaren drivers. This is a track that Norris has generally done pretty well on historically, and it's also a race where I think the layout more rear limited will suit him a little bit better. So even though I think there'll be a lot of pressure on him to win the title, I do think I'm going to pick him to win this Grand Prix, which if that happens, means that you probably have a pretty straightforward race with Lando winning the title. And again, a lot of maybe the potential controversies that could come out of this Grand Prix, a lot of those would probably not come to pass. For second, I'm going to go with his teammate Piastri. I do think McLaren are going to be very strong here. Mercedes might be another outside threat for the podium along with Verstappen. But I think this is a track that McLaren should do pretty well at. And for third, I think I'm going to pick Verstappen. I think he's been very, very strong. Last third of the season, he's been on the podium pretty much every race. And so as a result, I think it would be kind of foolish to not predict him to be on the podium. So there you go. That is my preview and my predictions for the 2025 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Should be a really exciting one. Really looking forward to what this weekend brings. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.